I'm so fly. I never land. Anyway, it's Mike Levin, Monday, July 9th at around 11 a.m. And I'm going to take my walk this morning and shoot my thought capturing video while not on a commute, not rushing from point A to point B. Point A usually being here and point B usually being somewhere around here in Manhattan. So I'm on Staten Island, and I'm going to walk through a little salt marsh reclamation project they have going on here in the Bay, and talk about the transition from being a traditional, well, never been a traditional, but a technical SEO who tends to website issues having to do with software and hardware configuration and the details of how a page is served, title and meta tags, and the way pages are interlinked, and almost everything except for content. But even in content, technically how you should be targeting the next subject matter so as to optimize the sort of rinse and repeat, the ocean always gets saltier, I guess compounding interest, accumulating effect of good content and following a content regimen plan. That's where Hittail, one of my older creations from 2006, came into play, still running strong today. It's a topic suggestion engine that looks at your site's activity and says, hey, since you have a propensity to be found on the following subjects, if you just adjusted your focus onto these other tangentially but clearly related subjects, you'll bring in more traffic, because from all the data your site proves it has a propensity to be able to do so. And I've created quite a number of systems like that over the years. And back in the day when you made a system like that, it was a Web 2.0 service. You had to get it out there, you had to build your subscriber base. But increasingly, as data sources become more tightly held, what I would look at, the flow of data coming in from, say, a tracking GIF system, like ye old days of Urchin before Google Analytics. Google bought it and it became Google Analytics. There was all kinds of cool homespun projects you could do with putting out your own tracking GIF and using the rich flow of data coming in. But as the web generally switched over to secure, that flow of data got cut off, and you had to start hitting data sources that are provided specifically by corporations who started hoarding the data in order to get it back. And they have the ability to cleanse, normalize, and aggregate and do all kinds of performance enhancements so that when you query against the data, it's fast. And that is, right now in today's world, Google Search Console, previously Webmaster Tools, which has been upping the time range, the time window of data. It used to be able to provide from 30 days, was it 30? Well, anyway, it's been 90 days for the longest time. They upped it to a year. It looks like it's going to 18 months. And so a lot of the approaches to things not only changed from the movement from tracking GIFs to hitting APIs, application program interfaces, to get that proprietary data, oftentimes provided at a cost, sometimes in the case of Google, free, to people who want that. And so projects became more and more like mashups. It went from the real-time world more to like a batch script world, because you were hitting data source A and B and C, pulling the data back, doing something with it, and then putting it out as output somewhere. Everything is a version of that. That's what data mastering is, right? If I'm talking about a transition from a field where you went through giant checklists of checklists to make sure every little detail of a site was correct, all that stuff is going into the category of commoditized. SEO best practices are out of a box, more and more often, based on the publishing platform you choose and the understanding of just good relationship building between subject matter by the editors and the publishers, the people putting it out. You create the rich cross-linking amongst your own content and the content within your whole family of sites, and use a competent content management system, WordPress or fill in the blank gazillion other systems, and you've got a basically search optimized site. The rest of it is building up credibility, inbound linking sources from the world at large and through other things than traditional web links. Lots and lots of signals are out there. In fact, there's so many signals you can't really follow how many signals are out there, and certainly not track them and keep your own copy of all this stuff the way I guess Google does. Instead, you have to sort of sit from the outside and watch its input and output and sort of guess what's going on and look for correlation, while accepting that correlation does not mean causation. Correlation, A, might mean causation, and B, even if it doesn't, can give you lots of insight as to what you should be doing and why, even if it's indirect. So all those projects that SEOs used to talk about all the time, and a few of them, a handful of them, I could probably rattle their names. They have reputations in the industry when they poke their head up and actually do something interesting, like release some of their work as one of these Web 2.0 things, like I did with HitTail. There's a few of them out there, and a lot of the SEO products are really associated with these people finally making their move and releasing something. But things are in transition now. Google released its mobile first index for users of mobile devices, so sites that are faster will have an advantage. That just shows you that the number of moving parts and the number of data points to track is so enormous as to be, well, you have to take these more stepping back and analyzing the landscape and using statistical techniques in order to look for these patterns and to guess at correlations or to infer to-do items, recommendations for a publisher to alter their site based on correlations that you see. It's still a little bit of which way the wind is blowing, because intuition, search engine optimization is increasingly becoming the field of watching machine learning take hold, and potentially one day artificial intelligence kick in. We are the observers, seeing what once was predictable, rote, gameable processes become much less rote and much less gameable processes. And as the processes are more and more difficult to directly cause effect, to influence, we have to become more like psychologists of these primitive machines, these insect-like probers that are out there, than we are checklist people. So I've always had that in mind. I always have viewed what was going on with search as the gradual waking up of some sort of very capable Turing machine of the type we have imagined many times before. But it's going to be like insect-like. It's going to be alien. It's not going to be one of these things that we can load into an android body and think it's a human buddy. It's going to be much more mechanical than that. And that mechanicalness, that predictability of, on average, things are going to display certain types of behavior, means that traditional statistics is becoming more important. We need to look at large bases of data, sometimes, well-aligned data, sometimes disparate data, find some sort of way to connect them, gather it over time, and let machine learning do its thing, do a little bit of training and, look for groupings that occur naturally through the kinds of AI systems that powered the Go, the computer that beat Go. I think it's Deep Thought, something like that. There's homages left and right from, from Douglas Adams to people, and then from people to Douglas Adams, and there's this whole, you know, deep blue thought thing going on that, you know, it all applies to the same set of notions. There's going to be some powerful computers out there that are going to systematically beat humans at things that were thought to be, you know, firmly in, you know, human domain. And that is going to put a lot of people out of work. And that should be taken mostly as a message to think about what you take on as professional aspirations. All those things that are still uniquely human are going to be the intensely sought after fodder of content that feeds the machine. So, you know, help feed the machine. And that's what I'm doing here. It's going to be a long time before Android can walk along a waterfront and just, you know, wax on about life and thinking through next steps of, you know, transitions from one way of converting energy that you put into things into tradable resources, punching the clock, working, having a career, becoming an entrepreneur, being a hunter. The ways this has been done through history has been diverse, and, you know, right now we're moving between something that's based greatly on military industrial capacity, assembly lines, build more stuff, sell more stuff to more people cheaper, get everyone's quality of life higher, price of goods lower, the consuming cycle faster, and corporations who are feeding the machine richer. And the shape of the Pareto curve, or the Ziff wealth distribution curve, power curve, more pure. Normal distribution and power curves and logistics curves, those three things, show us the three prevailing trends in nature that are often second degree or not, you know, they're not linear equations. What comes out is not, you know, a times some multiplier factor of what comes in. It's a times itself, or a times 10, which creates these dramatic slopes. And depending on how many degrees are in the equation, it might slope back and have a tangent point that's, you know, where the transition actually occurs from the old way where one factor was prevalent to the new way where another factor is prevalent. And we're going through that with SEO, let me tell you. The old ways will continue to work. You'll still be tweaking title and meta tags for quite some time. But the new way is to do stupid data tricks. It's to do stupid data tricks on demand, feeling it out as if you were in there living with the data, trying things step by step and interrupting it as it goes, inspecting the components of values, stopping and pivoting right as you code, taking different directions. And that is a read, execute, print loop. Read, execute, print loop, REPL. And that is Jupyter Notebook. And that is the Python programming language in web forms in your web browser. In a notebook from Jupyter Notebook, which gets installed on your machine when you do the Anaconda install, usually 3.6 or 3.7, Python version 3.6 or 3.7 of Anaconda for your usually 64-bit host machine, be it Linux, Macs, or Windows machines. Now this is where a large part of the importance of what I'm saying comes from. The people at Continuum.io pulled off a miracle in providing a true multi-platform Python environment where the dependencies for what you write are also equally multi-platform, with a few annoying exceptions. those things that are usually provided much better by the host operating system and have syntax and language and API details that are really tied to the host operating system, like backslashes for Windows versus forward slashes for everything else when doing path names. So there's always some variation, some subtle variations here and there in the code in order to get around unavoidable platform details. But for the most part, you write something in Jupyter Notebook, you're doing it like you're using that musical instrument that I've always been coveting from other fields. Musicians have their musical instruments and violins and stuff that you can gain physical mastery of, and your muscle memory will serve you for the rest of your life. Tech has very, very few of these things, but the web browser seems to be sticking, right? It's okay to invest in the web browser for muscle memory. Chrome and Chromium, because Chromium is part of the, free and open source movement, FOSS software. So for people who are paranoid about Google dependency, you can still use Chrome in the form of Chromium from GitHub. Just, don't poo-poo major platforms where all the activity is going on just because Google and it's yet another corporate overlord you're going to be paranoid about. You got to drink someone's Kool-Aid, and if you're going to drink someone's Kool-Aid, it's really, is it Apple's or is it Google's? And to a lesser degree, is it Amazon's or maybe some other, fourth horse in the race? But, it's good to be multilingual, keep a foot in, multiple platforms. It's good to keep a foot in an old school platform, and that's a lot of what I'm talking about, because a lot of the utility I get from Jupyter Notebook from a multi-platform standpoint, your Python code being able to flow from here to there, to be able to be shared amongst internal corporate groups, of which many people are not programmers, right? They're just everyday people who know that they need to be getting a little more technical to stay competitive with all their other coworkers who are. And all roads lead to JavaScript, and that is a false road. Let them, you can't dissuade people from JavaScript. It is as part of our life as the web browser is. But just because PostScript is part of our life doesn't mean you have to know the inner details of PostScript to use a laser printer. It's output. Browser is a little bit more powerful because it's input and output, but no doubt browser is about the equivalent of an Apple laser writer. Don't go sinking your career into it, because you're either going to be a low-level implementation guy creating libraries or a high-level library user, which is going to be a library du jour because of the dynamic nature of JavaScript. API details can vary radically from version to version, and how things look in the browser as a result of that creates strong signatures and styles, React versus Angular, and then there's going to be fads and movements, and people are going to rush from here to there, whereas I'm going to be using Python for back-end work. Now, when I say back-end, it usually means machine to machine. There's tons of jokes that can be used there, but one of the machines is actually even the front-end user interface. So user interfaces very often have APIs themselves, like they, can be controlled, and you can do GUI work. And if you want to waste 80% of your time on 20% of what's important about the project, totally go do GUI work. Graphical user interface, web user interface, user experience, user interactivity. You fill in the blank, but it's the sexiest part of the field. The billionaire jackpot is there because you can do something unique in a game with a user interface, and bam, suddenly you're an app store billionaire, right? Instagram and all that. But if you don't want to get into that particular highly competitive, Olympic caliber, obsessiveness required part of the field of programming, you can get into the daily grind of the just samurai sword, be a warrior, go to work for a lord, and when you got to do the business, be able to do it fast, well, have the muscle memory developed on a bunch of old school tools that are going to be with you for the rest of your life. because the web browser isn't going away. And I talk about Chrome and Chromium and, you know, things there. It's because, you know, it's now able to be controlled headlessly. So Chrome can be a thing you control with Python, especially through a Selenium library and stuff like this. All things which are not going away. Components get swapped in and out. So things like the Phantom JS, you know, browser component that lets you crawl websites as if a web browser can be pulled out because it was, you know, third party, goes out of date, not in sync with the latest greatest work, and Chrome plugged in. So Chrome becomes your headless web browser. So you can do automations where instead of just getting the view source part of the code, you get the actual fully constructed in memory as if you were a human being browser experience with a whole object structure there. And so crawling sites becomes as if you're a human. Very difficult for the servers and, you know, IDSs, intrusion detection systems, to tell you from a human, especially if you do things correctly with sessions and the timing of page loads and stuff. So all this is becoming easy. So back-end work is becoming more like front-end work, and is lucrative and avoids the big time sink of the sexy user interface stuff, which I'm not discounting in importance, but I am calling it a lot like PostScript. JavaScript is PostScript in the modern world, and no one wants to specialize in, you know, that kind of language to just get work done daily, to be able to answer yes more and more frequently to the requests of your bosses and such. And that is definitely what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to answer yes to those requests, competently turn around deliverables of one type or another. And that's what I was talking about a moment ago, either in Jupyter Notebook, where you feel it out as it runs in a REPL environment, interactive, web browser based, very familiar, low barrier to entry, not very automatable, because every time you need to do that thing again, you need to load Jupyter Notebook, check initial conditions, hit run, and make sure you're not overwriting old files, accommodate for all the things that you did in such a way because you thought you were just going to be sitting there using it maybe once, and it becomes really tedious. So the other way of doing these things is to just pop them on over into a text file with a .py extension instead of I guess it's still a text file, but it's a notebook formatted .ipny file, which is Python code embedded inside of JavaScript code for Jupyter Notebook. Instead of a .ipynb for that real-time interactive feeling out the code for ad hoc deliverables, you put it in a .py file for constant automated running according to what most people would say cron script, right? Not a big cron fan myself. Cron tables and all the nonsense built up around making cron usable. And cron is the Linux default and Unix default scheduling system built into all Unix and Linux systems. So when you want to do scheduling, that's the way. It's not just about scheduling. It's about running it the first time the server boots up, and then it's about monitoring tasks, operating system level monitoring tasks to check if something is running, and if not, it respawns it. So you actually need a monitor and a respawner, which can have other things inserted in at the operating system level to do email notifications or fail-safe fallover scenarios. If you want, all that is optional. And that's the point. You start out with the most simple way to get the continuous running of something that you have control of, and that's a .py file under Linux's systemd. scheduling and task manager. It's the equivalent, I guess, of the Windows Task Manager and the Windows Scheduler, but it by default doesn't have a graphical user interface. It's just one of these typey tools from the Unix and Linux side. Well, really the Linux side, this is a Linux thing. And it is known to be replacing two things, not just cron, which was the old scheduling system, but also init.d. I always forget the name for it, but it's the old Debian bash way of starting and stopping tasks that use a bunch of files, bash files, traditional Linux scripts, usually the bash dialect of Linux scripts, arranged in your /etc folder /init.d folder. And that is still around. It's never going to be pulled out, because for people who like it really old school, that system is preferable because all those scripts are directly under their control when you're a bash guru. But for the rest of us mortals, we like to look at a nice simplified configuration file of the type that on Windows .ini files got us used to, on lots of other systems, XML files, XML configuration files got us used to. So Systemd uses that as well. They use a I just get stunned by the beauty of all this sometimes. Systemd uses its own made-up, configuration file convention, and you lay it out just so, and you say how often the operating system should check for the task, what the task is called, and you set it to respawn. You can also do some scheduling in there, but I don't, and I just keep respawning a single .py file. This, my friends, is the beginning of switching from a traditional technical search engine optimizer, SEO, to a data master. Because you're not going to master much data if you don't have your scripts running every day according to some schedule, regimen, routine that is as flexible as your ability to imagine it. Which means not just some pick up a scheduling system and start using a web user interface to do scheduling, although that is frequently done. I would just run a scheduling package from Python and do it all under Python. And so I run something, a .py file, which is really the use of the schedule module from PyPI, the Python packaging index. So it's pip install schedule to get it, even though sched is actually on your machine, sched, which is a competent little scheduler that comes with the Python core library, batteries included, usually installs with Python. So before you go looking for a third-party library to do something in Python, check what's built in, see if it doesn't suffice, see if you like the API, because very often these third-party libraries are just a slight respinning of an API to take something that supports all edge cases, URL lib, into something that supports most edge cases many, many times easier. Kenneth Wright's requests library, perhaps the all-time most popular. So things set in because they bring a better API to stuff that you might have been using all the time anyway. And so one of them is NumPy in Python. NumPy brings numeric arrays, interestingly missing from Python to Python, using C optimizations that keep it from taking advantage of the multi-core nature of your machine. Which is not to say Python doesn't multitask, but it is to say you've got to adjust your technique knowing that NumPy is going to grab a CPU. So you can do multi-threading or splitting your processes before invoking NumPy and use your multiple processors, but now it shifts some of the management of that task onto you. Now, if you're really crazy, you can find things like Pyforia or Pyfora, which is a way that Python just does it for you. You don't even need to think about it. You continue coding the way you normally do, and as long as you use certain techniques like list comprehensions and map reduce techniques, the tasks will automatically take full advantage of your multiprocessor environment. But that's not going to be most people. Most people are just going to use NumPy. 99.9% of the people are just going to use NumPy without hardly even knowing it, because while NumPy is numeric array for number crunchers and scientists and previous users of things like Fortran, SciPy is for scientists, bringing all the scientific, I guess, methods and libraries and whatever on top of NumPy. And there's a few others like that, and that was the world for a while, until someone realized that everything you do in SQL, which is mostly set unifications and manipulations, set principles, you've got a set of things, you've got a set of another things. The first set somehow relates to the second set, and because of that relationship, you can join them and treat them as a single thing, like two different log files, both of which have a URL column, one tracking revenue per page, the other tracking, search hits per page. And you can start to draw correlations that are very meaningful for business. And even though conceptually it's so friggin' easy, grab this data from the left, grab this data from the right, join it under the following rules of, deduping or allowing duplicates, left, right, in or out, or all that stuff. And you have and then maybe an additional filter, some greater thans and less thans to get the number of rows down. And now you have a corporate executive dashboard. If you can keep that thing updated, you're golden with some color coding. So that's data mastering. It's writing the script in Jupyter Notebook that does that in the first place. It's lifting that up and putting it over in a .py file under probably Linux System D, under some assortment of, nested calling packages that create the environment you want to work the way you want. And for me, that's, the schedule module, pip install schedule, on a machine that has all the requirements for pandas. Pandas is the thing that replaces SQL in a Python environment for this type of work. Of course, because it's so suitable for, non-persistent temporary table work, there's other things out there. I think it's called Blaze and stuff that works as transports to the persistent SQL world. So when you want the ease of the Python API controlling automations of the complex or proprietary SQL world, you can use other libraries in the picture to create real-time gateways and stuff, so that you just talk about it as if it were a normal pandas project, and that stuff, permissions allowing, and just becomes persistent changes in your actual SQL tables in your enterprise system or whatever. So all this stuff is like always a small tweak away from being used in some other way, in some more scalable or enterprise capacity, but you're getting to know it all at the old school low level. There's no graphical user interface other than the type E text thing. And there's, and every platform supports this stuff. Really, the last holdout has been Windows. And Windows now supports subsystems with Windows in charge. So the battle for being the operating system in charge that actually gets the money for the first original install onto the hardware, that battle is ongoing. And Microsoft is firmly in that battle, trying to be the graphical user interface that you click and drop and do stuff because people want to work that way. But it controls unlimited systems out there of a very heterogeneous nature, lots of Linux systems, because it can be a subsystem right on the Windows system. You can actually have, 24/7 server style Linux Unix tasks running on Windows. There's some details they're still working out. Graphics stuff doesn't work as well as server stuff. But Windows 10 has become a completely valid platform to be on, because you have a more everything compliant version of Linux sitting there than, probably even Mac. I mean, Mac has a very industry compliant Unix there, but it's not in the free and open source world. You got to start using things like Homebrew and Mac ports and all this stuff in order to make it somewhat mainstream in the free and open source world. But on a Windows machine with an Ubuntu kernel subsystem, it's Ubuntu. It's the most supported Unix out there on the planet, second only maybe to the Red Hat versions, which are IBM, CentOS and those sorts of enterprise packages. But Microsoft made the gutsy move to make its first subsystem Ubuntu because groundswell, because lots of people know it already. And Ubuntu is changing all the mistakes of doing its only holdout proprietary thing, which was the Unity user interface. They tried to make things more everything platform, tablets, phones, and Unity, it was all one thing. Carry your phone around and it becomes your desktop. Well, it got shut out by the success momentum of iOS and Android. So no Unity, because its advantage without that mobile part was not compelling enough. So they go back to the GNOME user interface, which interestingly makes Ubuntu from Canonical the canonical, finally now, version of beloved Linux in the industry. If you want to use a common mainstream, could be enterprise supported Linux with massive free and open source world support, you choose Ubuntu. There's like no downside. But I'm not even doing that. I'm on a nice Microsoft laptop. It's a Portfolio. I can't even call it a laptop. It's a strange machine that makes me love it more every time I use it. It's a Portfolio convertible, the Surface Book 2, I think they call it. And, first screen is always full screen terminal. Second screen is always full screen browser. I go left, right. I got that muscle memory. It's becoming more and more like a martial arts weapon every day. And I feel it happening, and I love it happening. I'm finally getting the violin. I'm finally getting, the hammer of the tech industry. Something that I can develop my muscle memory on. I can get better and better, specifically at pandas. Pandas under Jupyter Notebook in a web browser on screen 2 to feel things out and to experiment and to have a REPL environment where it's not even interrupting code. You let it run a block at a time. It's not checkpoints in an IDE in high-end Xcode or Visual Studio or Eclipse coding software. It's block by block in a web browser and saying, run this, now run this, and then you can inspect the variables and you can write little things in the middle to check how things are going. And just in every way, Jupyter Notebook is where you want to be starting out in Python, so you can give Python a fair chance versus JavaScript in your head before you become the next, sacrificial youth on the altar of JavaScript. Try Python, install Anaconda, probably 64-bit, probably Python 3.6, maybe 3.7 at this time. Run Jupyter Notebook after the Anaconda install. It'll pop open in your web browser. Type hello world with either single quotes or double quotes around it. Press run. That's hello world in Python in the Jupyter Notebook environment that you get with the Anaconda install. Congratulations, you're a coder. You were already a coder by being able to speak English and even understand this video. Everyone's already a natural coder. It's just that languages like Python are made for you to talk to machines instead of to other humans. And if you're going to talk to machines, you want to make that language as comfortable for yourself as possible. Make difficult ideas easy. Make the implementation of ideas that link up several sophisticated but easily expressed ideas in a compact format. That's where things like list comprehension start to come together with traditional loops, starting to come together with Python generators, very different from Ruby generators, you people. I'm not talking about scaffolding spewers. I'm talking about the ability to freeze any function mid-running, return a small value, and pick up where it left off. Really good for streaming data out to the user without that traditional, I click this and that happens, a request response. Request response is just one of various interactive models with the user. And very often the language excessively promotes one of those models of interactivity. If you start using Python with the yield statement to write generators, you'll understand this, and it's not hard either. It's actually like there's all kinds of sophisticated concepts that start to link together to let you do all those things that you probably always imagined you could do, but to actually do it, to have it as part of your life, as the natural way you would actually even speak. It becomes that natural. It becomes an extension of your body. Evolutionarily speaking, Python, I think, is going to be part of who we are as a species. It's going to exceed English as a universal language of tech. If it has not already, it will surpass things like the Bash shell and Perl, which really are. And it'll surpass things like Java, what else is and JavaScript, which are today's darlings. It'll never surpass certain things that are just the domain dominant best languages for their field, but things then get to start to be viewed as subsets or complementary to each other. Python doesn't need to be the R analytical language, nor does does everybody need to learn Lisp so that they can work at such a low level to create such high level abstractions, a metaprogramming language. Although that, in many ways, any of these languages could be the first and last language you ever learn or you ever need to learn. Lisp has that aspect to it, Java does, JavaScript, I guess I'll begrudgingly admit. Python certainly does. But Python is very much like English. It has a momentum, it's being picked up, it's being used as the API language on almost everything, so that the execution contexts become radically different, from being how you program a drone and a 3D printer to how you program sensors and let's see what else in Python. There's endless strange execution contexts you'll find where you go, I know this, it's Python, and just get to work on a new environment, a new setting, because you bring to it, like, I guess what C-3PO from Star Wars brings to it, a universal translator. It's like you speak the thing that speaks everything else when you speak Python. So anyway, that became a Python evangelical thing. I guess where I want to go with this is my work that I'm about to sit down and actually do, in which case I am just creating very low resistance, low friction ways to move things you did in pandas back and forth to Google Sheets to actually be a dashboard, with all the formatting staying persistent in Google Sheets, so that as you do manipulation work and you move it in and out, a dashboard just updates like it's twinkling in front of your eyes without any third-party proprietary paid-for software at all, except for a Linux-type server to run it on. It could be in the cloud, it could be a Raspberry Pi, doesn't matter. If you're sticking to Google services, it's all free. And then just that technique lets you blend in any other API, which have their own nuances. You get to, you always have to learn, you always have to account for time for getting to know the nuances of new APIs, because it's like a new thing you're talking to, and it speaks a different language. And like C-3PO, you have to get to learn that language before you're productive in your communications. So my system is just a light touch to connect pandas and GSpread or whatever other library I plan to use to facilitate Google spreadsheet manipulations, so the pandas Google spreadsheets back and forth flow to do all kinds of dashboards, and occasionally taking Google Sheets out of the picture so it can be set up as a scheduled task that outputs something like an Excel or a CSV file. And it's time for me to get my cold brew and get to work. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.